Okay. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everybody's connecting. Delighted you're joining our session. My name is Dan Owen, and I'm moderating this afternoon just to make sure you're in the right place. This is the breakout session on making prevention more effective through better use of primary data from affected communities. I lead the World Bank Global Program for Reintegration Support, which is a platform established in 2017, really as a successor to a series of multi-donor initiatives hosted at the World Bank to support DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. A couple of these multi-donor initiatives, the multi-country demobilization reintegration program, which ran for 10 years at the beginning of the decade, and the follow-up transitional demobilization reintegration program, which closed in 2017, essentially channeling support and World Bank technical assistance on reintegrating ex-combatants back into society, into civilian life. I think one of the main issues, if we look back over the last several decades, particularly of World Bank assistance to DDR, but also more broadly in the type of interventions and support to conflict-affected contexts, is that often we find we've been focusing very much on the symptoms rather than getting to the root causes and the real drivers of fragility, conflict, and violence. And there's a whole handful of flagship strategic reports over the last couple of years, certainly on the World Bank side, the production, dissemination early this year of the new strategy on fragility, conflict, and violence, but also including the UN Pathways to Peace report, the AU Silencing the Guns initiative, the Sustaining Peace initiative, that's hosted by the United Nations. I think the key messages from all these flagship reports are very much around a pivot to prevention, and that prevention is really the absolute key to building effective and sustainable models and approaches to conflict resolution. But there's a big issue in implementation, in how you translate those sorts of concepts and strategic directions into implementation priorities and action. And fundamental to that change in direction is really getting a better understanding of the dynamics of drivers of fragility and conflicts, as I was saying, but also the whole premise of an evidence base and the issue of the availability and the quality of data that's available to decision makers to inform programming. I think one of the pieces I picked up from the opening statements this morning for the PeaceCon, the opening address, was going back to some of the key concepts from last year's PeaceCon and on transformation, on integration, and including adaptation as the sort of key precepts for as part of a kind of shift in how we do our work. And I think those are absolutely central to this issue on building collective action around better use of information, dissemination, and use of that information. So this session is going to touch on various aspects of that, around how you optimize partnerships, collaboration between stakeholders on data collection, data use, data framing, and how that informs collective action, joint action on programming, both on conflict prevention and also the bridging between conflict prevention and conflict response. And what we're going to hear from the panel today essentially are insights from an initiative that's been supported through the African Union over the last few years, which I will come to in a second. So I want to run through just a few points, just as by way of introduction, and then I'll explain a little bit about the format for the next 90 minutes. And then introduce our collection of fantastic panelists that we have this afternoon. So just in terms of the overall challenges, the objectives, achieving collective outcomes, I think the essence here is conflict prevention requires, much better, much more rigorous and coordinated partnerships across a broad community of practice, and that community of practice spans research, analytics, operations, but also the sort of more formal policy aspects. I think that the certainly what's borne out in the flagship reports I was mentioning is that for effective prevention, collaboration platforms, partnership platforms between agencies, multi-stakeholder initiatives are absolutely essential. And it's part of this is about programming and interventions, but a lot of it is about the information, the evidence base that's being used, shared, and communicated. And I think that the general understanding is that to date there's still a huge challenge in translating the prevention agenda into formal practice. Certainly, we find over the course of the last year, and we'll talk more about this as we go into some of the elements of the collaboration platform that's been established around the panelists today will be speaking from perspectives of partners in this program. But the last year with the COVID pandemic, the challenges in outreach and access to whether it's isolated groups or it's to particularly vulnerable groups. So the kind of human dimension of partners in collaboration around data and information is a very real one. In terms of the program, the World Bank has been partnering with the UN, with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, with UNITAR and the High Commission for Human Rights represented today, and supporting the Defence and Security Unit at the African Union, together with the Early Warning Systems Unit, in better integrating human rights considerations into the work and particularly into the whole sort of functioning of the early warning system. The first phase of that collaboration focused very much on mainstreaming human rights into the data sets and indicators and analysis tools, and also production of guidance notes for DDR in the Defence and Security Division. The phase that we're going to talk about today is really centered around leveraging results of the first phase and about the whole kind of process of knowledge generation and cascading that knowledge generation into influence and guidance for through the whole architecture of member states and the various peace and peace building programs. So, in terms of the program itself, there are four main partners and a collection of stakeholders for this that will be described in the presentations. There's the Global Program for Reintegration Support at the World Bank, that together with the Peacekeeping Department, the UN, has been supporting a capacity building program for the African Union since 2012. The UN Human Rights High Commission, with its expertise on human rights and prevention, and a very strong network of civil society partners, is a key project partner. UNITAR, in a similar fashion, again with its extensive expertise in training, research, and a network of national training and research partners. And the African Union, again, as I said, focusing very much on the Qs, the Continental Early Warning System, and the Defence and Security Division, but also working down through their partners in the continent, particularly regional economic commissions. On the stakeholders, I'm not going to go into any detail here, but these include regional economic commissions, some select regional research and training centres of excellence, and national human rights institutes and civil society organisations. So what we're going to do in the session today is divided into two sections. The first will really be on the first objective of the program, looking at different partner perspectives and methodologies, and the objectives in the collaboration in trying to harmonize data collection and analysis. So we'll have two presentations in the first section, and then the second section will really be around the second objective, which is about fostering knowledge and sharing, knowledge exchange, knowledge and learning, and we will go through some of the key sort of learning agenda points in this collaboration. And we will open up for a Q&A. Again, if you have questions, please use the chat function to post those questions, and we'll address those in the plenary that we'll have after each of the sessions. The other, just to say before I introduce the speakers, we have a couple of very short polls that we will post out, just to have a bit of a better understanding of who you are as an audience. We'd love to know a little bit about your own institution, and on some of the aspects that will be touched on in today's session, where the challenges lie. So let me quickly now move to presenting our panelists. And again, I'm delighted to be able to welcome our panelists. We have connecting from Addis, Taye Abdullah Kadir, who is the Senior Technical Officer at the AU in the Continental Early Warning Systems Division, and he plays a very key role in the conceptualization and operationalization of the technical aspects of the early warning system, and includes working out how they link to regional early warning systems. He's also a professor, assistant professor of computer science at the School of Computer Science and Technology in Addis. We have also on the panel OHCHR Kufuor, who is the acting chief of the East Africa Regional Office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights, and the representative to the African Union. She's the current Women's Rights and Gender Advisor for that UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and has worked on human rights and related areas in Sudan, Darfur, and Afghanistan. In the second part of the session, we will be hearing from Svenja Volmer, who is a specialist with the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR, and is responsible for the development and the implementation of capacity building initiatives in the broader peace and security field. And she leads projects in a variety of contexts, including Uganda, Liberia, and Colombia. And finally, we have Amy Dwyer, who is a monitoring and evaluation expert with ECORIS, specializes in qualitative approaches to gender, conflict, and human rights, and has worked across UK government agencies, but also the EU, UN, and various donor agencies. So, without further ado, let me turn to the first session. And Taye, I know we're running the risk of technical glitches with bandwidth in Addis, but I see you're on screen. Let's turn over to you and your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you, all the organizers. We are happy to present in this particular panel, and I acknowledge the presence of all the participants. Thank you all the organizers of this particular PeaceCon, and specifically this breakout session with USIP. Thank you, colleague panelists. I'm going to speak about the contemporary warning system in the next 7 to 10 minutes to give you a kind of a broader highlight on how we operate. And by the end of my discussion, I will come into the specific scenario where Dan described how we can actually try to mainstream human rights into our work. Okay, therefore, as Dan mentioned, my name is Taye, and I'm speaking to you from Addis. I work with the Peace and Security Department of the African Union Commission, more specifically with the Continental Early Warning System. And in this session, I would like to give you that broader view as far as the Continental Early Warning System is concerned. And the Continental Early Warning System is one of the pillars of the African Peace and Security Architecture, which has been created just after the creation of the African Union, after the Organization of African Unity, in order to achieve the goal of peace and stability across the continent. And we have been tasked specifically on a conflict prevention and early warning mandate. And as per the framework that depicts the creation of the Continental Early Warning System, we have been given three most important things that actually guide our operation. These three are data collection using appropriate defined indicators and their follow-up analysis. The second task that we have been given was engagement with decision makers through our products. And the third one is coordination and collaboration with different stakeholders, including civil society organizations, think tanks, UN, EU, etc. And in order to operationalize our task, of course, we have got a monitoring and data gathering center at the African Union, which is known as the Situation Room. And we are actually connected as part and parcel to the early warning systems of the regional economic communities. Therefore, we are actually working hand in hand with our regional economic communities, the likes of ECOWAS or SADC or EAC, East African Community, or IGAD, etc., or regional mechanisms, including East African Standby Force and NARC. Therefore, this is how we operate. Then, to describe the three important tasks that we have been assigned, I'm going to go through some descriptions. The first one is regarding data collection, information gathering. And as you all know, we are a conflict early warning system, and conflict is not going to emanate out of the blue. There are a number of structural issues that we monitor over time, and there are dynamic issues that are also causing a kind of problem in the near time. Therefore, we should handle both operational conflict prevention as well as structural conflict prevention. And in doing so, of course, we are trying to gather data from the open source, for example. Open source means those kind of data that are equally available for all of us, whether you are monitoring news sites or blogs or social media or some subscribed wires. You can actually mine that information for relevant data that is going to infuse in order to make your analytic products better. But the other aspect of our data gathering is basically trying to get specific first-hand information from our own people who are actually on the ground. And we call generically that aspect field reporting. And field reporting helps us to get a kind of first-hand information from our own informants. Originally, when we began field reporting around 2010, we have been relying on our own colleagues in the AU field mission and liaison offices, but that actually didn't prove well in answering our needs. Therefore, since 2015, we have been collaborating with civil society organizations, preferably with civil society umbrellas in the different regions in Africa. And our most important success story is from the West African region, where we partner with the West African Network of Peace Builders, which is an umbrella organization of numerous civil society organizations. Therefore, using that umbrella, we are actually getting incident reports, which are actually events, and situation reports, which is a kind of regular report coming from the field, came from all these 15 ECOWAS countries, thanks to the civil society umbrella. And by encouraging from the success, we actually expand that to the Southern Africa region in SADC. And in the SADC region, we get a very well-organized civil society organization known as the South African Partnership for the Prevention of Conflict, or SAPEC, and we are actually reaping the success of that partnership by getting very fine-grained first-hand data. Therefore, now, keeping this in mind now, yes, we are a conflict early warning system, and conflict can be actually pushed by so many factors, whether it is political, economic, demographics, service delivery, or governance, etc. issues. There is also an aspect of human rights being driving as a structural cause the creation of some kind of violent conflict happening afterwards. Therefore, thanks to the support we are getting from the World Bank, and thanks to the technical support we are getting from OHCHR, we embarked in the first phase, try to understand how we can mainstream human rights issue into our data collection and analysis aspect. Therefore, that actually bear fruit, but in this second phase, of course, we are trying to expand that further in order to look into all these avenues of our data collection in such a way that whatever is collected in the end is going to be analyzed in an appropriate framework. Therefore, we are also trying to create a kind of a human rights-based approach framework, which is going to help us deal with our analysis. Then the second aspect of our operation is engagement with decision makers. Therefore, unless you engage a decision maker for early response, preferably, you are not going to succeed in early warning. Therefore, we need to bridge that gap between early warning and early response by providing the necessary information into our decision makers. This can be through regular products, this can be through face-to-face briefings, this can be done through some kind of custom-based products that are going to cater into our decision makers. When I'm referring to decision makers, I'm here referring to the Commissioner of Peace and Security in our department and the chairperson of the African Union Commission, and most importantly, the Peace and Security Council. Therefore, we are following different avenues in order to inform our decision makers on any kind of potential conflict situation that may emanate based on our evidence that we collect from the data. However, if you look into the working methods of intergovernmental organizations like the African Union, at the end of the day, decision-making is going to be fulfilled by member states. Whether we are talking about Peace and Security Council or any other forums, the decision-making is going to be handled by member states. Therefore, the other alternative approach that we used nowadays is how to equip member states themselves so that they can really understand the vulnerabilities and resilience they have, and they are going to produce a kind of early response in their own hands. Therefore, in that regard, of course, the African Union understands this gap, and in 2013, the African Union Peace and Security Council created what is called the Continental Structural Conflict Prevention Framework. And the very benefit of this Continental Structural Conflict Prevention Framework is actually to create two important tools that are going to be spearheaded by our division, the Conflict Prevention and Early Warning Division, more specifically the Continental Early Warning System, in order to accompany member states to look into their own strengths and vulnerabilities. Not only looking into those strengths and vulnerabilities, but they can produce a kind of a mitigation strategy. And that mitigation strategy is subject to implementation. Therefore, now the role of the African Union is actually to guide how these countries are going to look into their own resilience and vulnerabilities. If they need any kind of resource mobilization for national and regional consultations, the AU is going to provide that. If there is any kind of an expertise needs, the AU is going to provide that. But the very nature of this particular process is voluntary. Therefore, unless a country comes forward and volunteer for this process, we cannot really push things on top of that country. Why we are really seeking for the voluntary nature? Because we need the ownership from that country. Therefore, we accompany that voluntary country, and we can actually proceed and accompany the country to understand its own strengths and vulnerability so that it can produce a document which in turn show the different mitigation strategies. Therefore, at the latter stage, of course, the country is going to come and brief the Peace and Security Council, and also the African Union is going to utilize its own resource mobilization methodologies to really seek some kind of support to that member state. And we did that in Ghana and in 2017 and in 2018. And luckily, we have got additional 2 countries coming on board in order to really pass through this process. These are Cote d'Ivoire and Zambia. And we are going to embark upon that process. Why I'm mentioning this process? Because the most important aspect of any early warning mechanism, whether things are really done clearly at the analytic and data collection phase, unless there is a kind of response done on that particular thing, we are not going to achieve our goal. Therefore, this helps us to bridge the gap of response. And the other thing that we try to do in many member states is building their national peace infrastructure. When we are mentioning this, it is basically capacitating a member state to do their early warning, to do their early response. It can be a kind of building of a situation room for them. It can be an implementation of a grassroots mediation. It can be capacity building, any kind of a national peace infrastructure. Maybe it can be a support to important peacemaking infrastructures that are available in the country. For example, some countries have got National Peace Council, some countries have got Mothers for Peace, some countries have got any kind of peacemaking architecture embedded in their own government and non-governmental mechanisms, and that actually helps us to make ourselves nearer to the country so that each of these early warning and early response mechanisms will be addressed effectively. Therefore, now, this is the overall approach that I try to give you as a briefing. And now coming back to the specific endeavors that now we are trying to do with our colleagues from World Bank, and of course the British government is also supporting us with money, and of course the experts of the OHCHR, we are trying to really delve more on how to integrate the whole idea of human rights into the whole spectrum of our work, whether it is at the data collection phase or at the analysis phase, as well as at the phase of response. Therefore, this will help us to look into this particular human rights lens, and that experience is going to give us some leverage when we try to either embed or mainstream other important issues that are precursors for conflict. Since human rights is a very critical structural issue, looking in the lens of human rights across all the board of the spectrum is going to give us some leverage in order to go forward and try to look into other issues. And maybe also one important thing, in the AU, we do have a number of other departments. Therefore, we are trying to leverage a kind of interdepartmental task force, which looks into the conflict aspect of economy, the conflict aspect of social, for example, epidemics, the conflict aspect of technology, the conflict aspect of other things, so that they are covered in the different departments. Therefore, this holistic approach may actually taking us forward in order to deploy a kind of integrated early warning system going forward. But now what we are trying to do with this particular project is, yes, we do have a very mature data collection mechanism, most importantly, thanks to our civil society partners on the field. We do have a very mature analytic mechanism, and we do have a kind of well-established engagement with decision makers. Therefore, with this notion of human rights, how can we actually mainstream that concept into the whole spectrum of the work? Thank you, Dan. I think I took a little more time, but thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ty. And that's a great background to the work that's going on. I can see we have a number of questions, which I will come back and pose to you. I think we'll move straight on at this stage and hear from OHCHR again on the OHCHR collaboration in the program, and we've been very fortunate to have a close partnership on the human rights mainstreaming through the African Union Capacity Building Programme over the last several years. So I would suggest, Adjoa, if you go ahead, and then please, on the audience side, carry on. I am taking note of the questions and make sure that that those are then responded to in the break we have between the first and second parts of this session. Adjoa, over to you.
Thank you, Dan. Good afternoon. Thank you, colleagues. And thank you, Taye, for explaining so well the actual process and the systems that we are using. I think we all agree human rights violations are a source of conflict, and preventing serious human rights violations from occurring is vital to preventing conflict and sustaining peace. And this is what the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights brings to this project. And we bring also, of course, our considerable work that the office has done, and also the UN human rights bodies in other contexts, whether it's in our fact-finding mission or peacekeeping mission, to bear on this project. It's in the context of the longer-term development support to efforts by states and partners at the national level, as well as part of the sustaining peace agenda. We also, of course, as an office, we contribute to non-occurrence of reoccurrence of violations by identifying root causes and accelerators of human rights, of serious human rights violations, by usually identifying perpetrators and collecting information on human rights violations, and certainly making recommendations for specific actions, especially in the context of accountability and transitional justice. There is certainly a strong link between prevention and truth-seeking. And this is what the office does when it comes to prevention. Now, as the UN Secretary General has emphasized in the call for action on human rights, there is a well-documented correlation between a society's enjoyment of and commitment to human rights and its resilience to crisis. Structural prevention, and this is what we are doing here, aims to rectify some of the systemic deficiencies and thus reduce the likelihood of violations in the context of peacekeeping or even on the continent. And of course, in achieving this is necessarily based in human rights. We know that many outbreaks of violence and conflicts have their roots in long-standing discriminations, economic inequality, social exclusion, and denial of economic and social rights. The work the office has done across Africa and across the globe confirms this. The severe inequalities are significant risk factors for tensions and conflicts. And to ensure that we devise the most effective action to prevent conflict, we need to have a better understanding on the factors that lead up to these situations by having data, reliable and accurate disaggregated data from the most affected communities and regions, including those with intersecting forms of vulnerability. What we've seen in many contexts is that the data on those most affected, here we're talking about women and youth, and those with most information to share with primary data are often not consulted or form part of early warning. And a human rights-based approach to early warning addresses this gap and allows all these sources, information to be gathered from all these sources. This is why the current work we are doing with the African Union and the bank is so critical. The project has a strong focus on bringing together a wide range of actors, including civil societies, groups, NHRIs, women and youth groups, centers of excellence, and many others, not traditionally seen as having a role to play when it comes to conflict prevention or early warning or sustaining peace. With this, the African Union has really made human rights central to its efforts to prevent conflicts. It has sent a signal of the usefulness and centrality of the inclusion of human rights in conflict prevention and early warning, and is forming partnerships across prevention that can be, and this is the second phase where Taye spoke about the regional economic commission. We now, the OHCHR, AU, and the World Bank has opened a tremendous opportunity for greater integration of human rights approach and goals, including recommendations from the human rights mechanisms into the work of the AU. Quite simply, it is human rights in action, what Taye presented. It means our data collection now is disaggregated and is reaching the most vulnerable and the marginalized. And it's making sure that human rights safeguards are in place for the collection, processing, and analysis and dissemination of that data. By building a solid human rights protection into the early warning system, this collaboration is investing in upstream prevention with a specific and radical focus on detecting and eliminating socioeconomic inequalities and marginalization, something that has not been done previously, where the focus really has been on civil and political rights, as indicated. Preventing conflicts well before their potential commission has been the object of considerable work by the UN Human Rights Office. And with this project, we are hoping to expand that and build on it and also replicate it. I'll conclude now with this brief introduction to human rights and prevention, and give the floor back to Dan and open to any questions you may have. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much, Adwa. That's all right. Terrific to kick us off. So maybe what we're going to do, as I said at the beginning, we're going to move in the second with Sonia and Amy into a discussion around the the way the sort of the communications, knowledge platform, knowledge exchange, learning, focusing on the different modalities at play. But maybe we just take let's take a few minutes now. Let me channel some of the questions that have come up in the chat, and I will. I mean, what we have a question on the actual use of data. Taye, that's obviously your best position to address. So this is discussing the use of different data sets of thick and thin data in terms of its structure, its validation, and general utility, and what the experience is, and I suppose just drawing on the work of Q's. And then one aspect which I know is it's often arising, and certainly in the World Bank, as we look forward to 2021, the World Development Report next year will be on data. That's the sort of central tenet of the World Development Report, and data for better lives. So data as a force for public good. Lots of questions arising around concerns about privacy, accessibility, availability, that sort of the ethics on data. So one question that's come up is, again, it's about the barriers, and I would suggest Taye and Adwa, you could both respond to that. What are there any obvious barriers that you have encountered in the kind of the public availability of data and the ability to do the sort of sharing that this project is very much being built around? The other, a couple of other questions around civil society participation. So I think I'm gonna put those on hold, and we'll come back to them a little bit later, because certainly there's I know we will get into a little bit more detail on stakeholders. I know one of the questions, the last question came in: is there a list of civil societies or a network that's already connected or capable of providing support across different regions of Africa? And I know we've had some examples again of sort of regional organisations, the umbrella groups. But Taye, perhaps if you want to come back to that question of the connection, the linkage with the umbrella civil society organisations you talked about. And I think the last question I picked up was a request for us to post links to connect after the forum. And I'd say, don't worry, the last slide you will see in the PowerPoint does have a list of contacts for you. We'll share those with you at the end. But let me turn back, Tai and Ajwa, if you'd like to respond to any of those questions that have arisen.
Ajwa, ladies first, or? Okay.
Well, perhaps you can go. Okay, I'm happy to at least touch upon quickly the question on with regard to data and data responsibility and human rights. I think this is a continuing challenge, and this is an area that we are also developing a lot of standards and processes around. We have a publication which I can put the link here on human rights approach to data. And here, of course, we are looking at how to collect it, whose data is collected, for what purpose, how is it used, how is it stored, and how is it destroyed. A lot of the challenges we have now, the Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty held consultations this year on digitalization of social security data, and how that actually can be quite can be used negatively to target certain groups, to undermine certain rights, and to prevent certain people from accessing certain services. We also see challenges about how data is stored, who gets access to that data, and this issue around private-public partnerships on data. As an office, from its creation, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been collecting data. That's what we do. We monitor, we document human rights violations. So we collect data, we collect incident reports, we collect stories. We have a long history of collecting data, and we have put in safeguards for how our data is used, whether it's used for accountability, is it for memorialization, is it for also talking about perpetrators who has access to that data. So we have a lot of experience on that. But now I think, as Dan mentioned, a lot of what we are seeing is everything we do is about data. And in the context of Africa, we know not all the countries have data protection laws in place. So again, this is also an issue of concern. But we have a publication on human rights-based approach to data, and we are constantly learning. There are always new areas that are emerging, especially when we talk about women and gender-related issues. But on the technical side, I'll hand over to Taye. Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, thank you, Ajwa. But actually, based on the questions, I can speak so many hours, but for the sake of time, let's try to frame it. Therefore, I thank you, Dan, for summarizing it. I also catch them from the chat box. Therefore, one very important question raised by the first questioner is regarding the availability of all data that we are gathering for the public use. Unfortunately, no, that is a kind of political decision. But the majority of the data is actually collected from the open source. And what is available in the open source is equally available for all of us. It is the process, the methodology, the kind of system you put in place that is going to enable you to extract as much information as you can. Therefore, that actually takes me to the TIC-TIN data definition. For example, we have a situation room at the AU, and we have a very mature a kind of data mining system that are actually looking into all these different open sources. And we are monitoring issues in the 4 official languages of the AU, plus Swahili, English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. And from around 4,500 sources, we are reading nearly 100,000 articles per day. That is done by the machine. But unless this machine takes the task of tagging each of these individual data into relevant subject matter areas, whether it is human rights or conflict or a country or this subject matter, it is going to be difficult for human beings. Therefore, yes, we look into all those things. We try to extract relevant information from the open source, roughly around 10,000 different events, and that is going to really overwhelm us. But we need to be systematic enough to put in place our analysts in front of the computer so that they can actually make sense out of that data. But the best data that we can really consider very important is the first-hand information. Why? It is very much crafted to reflect our specific need. Two, it is going to be delivered or submitted by a particular entity that we train. Therefore, that is our important first-hand information. That is going to be have a kind of standard operating procedure on how we can share it, how we can collect it, how we can use it, etc. Therefore, that is treated in a completely different way. Therefore, this is regarding the data instead of going deeper. But Dan, if you allow me, the idea of CSOs, I can easily answer it. We pretty much appreciate if there is any African CSO who wants to work with us. Therefore, based on the contact address, you can send us an email, and especially if you are working in the Central Africa region, in the Eastern Africa region, or in the Northern Africa region, we always appreciate a kind of connection to a civil society organization so that we are going to train the civil society organization on our platform. We are going to teach the civil society organization on our standard operating procedures, and that civil society organization is going to be our eyes and ears on the ground in order to provide that information. But as it stands, we have very good success in West Africa, thanks to WANIP, West Africa Network of Peace Builders. We have a very good success in Southern Africa, thanks to the Southern African Partnership for the Prevention of Conflict, SAPEC. And encouraged by this, the AU is now supporting some civil society organizations in the East African and the Greater Horn region, together with IGAD and COMESA and EAC, in order to establish a similar umbrella. Why we are focusing on the umbrella structure? Easier for accountability, easier for training, easier for providing any kind of capacity building, etc. But even if there are individual CSOs in the other regions, we are happy to work with all of them. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And maybe just as a point here, I think there's, to some extent, as is sort of standard custom across the board, we've had to do some, kind of quick thinking on our feet about the sort of the public dissemination, even just the sort of work plan for this program. So we'll certainly be looking at what we can do in the early months of next year in terms of kind of public dialogue and sharing lessons. But I think it's a very useful question on civil society inclusion and where there might be potential points for collaborating or integrating in the work. Let's move. I'm sure we'll come back. Thank you very much again, Tai and Ajwa. We'll come back at the end for more comments and discussion. But at this point, I'd like to move into the second part, which is really on this, as I said, the communication and knowledge sharing, knowledge exchange. And delighted to have both UNITAR and ECHRIS with us today. So we'll start with Svenja. UNITAR have been supporting the project by focusing on blended online and offline learning training modalities, and I think we'll go through and listen to some of the points here on the particular capacity initiatives and looking. I think there's a lot again with the COVID situation. The whole sort of the onus on us to develop new ways of working in being able to deliver this sort of capacity support training, upskilling remotely and in innovative ways has been a particular press that, again, running across the gamut of our work, hopefully would be beneficial in the future, not just getting through a difficult period. So why don't we, Svenja, can I turn to you? I'll bring the PowerPoint back up. If you give me just 1 second. Thank you, by the way, to everyone who's been filling in the polls. You've had 2 posted, and there'll be 1 more that'll be coming up shortly. But for now, we will head back to, there we are. There we go. Svenja, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Dan. And it is my pleasure to be here in the session this evening. For me, I'm connecting from The Hague, the Netherlands, and this afternoon for most of our participants, maybe. And it's my great honor to follow the presentations of Taya and Nadra and be joining Amy in the second part today. And so what I will be speaking about briefly is really the role of capacity building and training in this whole context of the endeavor that we are all joining forces for, which is the connection between early warning and prevention and response. So how can we create more capacities for this linkage and support the African Union and other partners in doing so? And so I'm speaking about this in the context of this very specific work that we are doing, that we're supporting the partners on this panel with, which is in the context of DDR capacities. And so UNITAR is one of the dedicated training arms of the United Nations system, and as such, our mandate is to support member states, organizations, institutions, but also individuals in building results-based capacity building projects for the realization of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And within UNITAR's mandate of training and capacity building, there's many different ways of how we work and services that we put in support of our partners, and that ranges from training, facilitation, to coaching and mentoring programs. We set in place training of trainers, methodologies that is also being used in this project, which I will share in a minute. We have extensive expertise in e-learning and online facilitation, so the digital world is not new for us in that sense. The same for online courses, even full online master degrees. Advisory to other organizations in this specific area of learning and capacity building, support in advocacy, and as well in the creation of specific learning materials. So in this context, and connecting to what Taya, Dan, and Adra have been presenting, what are we trying to do, and why are we looking at a capacity building approach in support of this broad endeavor? And as Dan has introduced, and the point he was picking up from the opening this morning, is that really what all of the partners agree, and I guess a lot of the people who've connected, that it really takes a broad community of practice to move on the big challenges that we face in terms of as part of conflict, and really building a transformational vision towards a more peaceful future. And so the key focus, the first part, is really just to reiterating the purpose of this program is to connect prevention and response by bringing together the 2 dimensions of early warning and DDR. So using some of the thinking, some of the practices, some of the tools of the DDR world to connect with early warning systems for the purpose of better prevention. The second is to really support, as Taya was saying, there are so many structures already existing on the African continent, and of course also in other contexts, that where there is already capacities in place, and that can be used for such systems. So what we do as a training institution is to support these institutions, creating institutional linkages or strengthening them through these capacity building learning approaches, and including, of course, national stakeholders. Then a third focus area of this whole endeavor is also to support the establishment of a coordination system, as Dan has introduced as well, because it's also about knowledge sharing and together creating a broader knowledge base, as also Ajwa was mentioning, that it's really critical to data uses for early warning is that it's really broad data sources and not just limited to few. And the last part is also to enhance cooperation among different stakeholders in the DDR world, both in the mission and non-mission context, who can contribute to this. So just Dan has introduced this in the beginning, but just and Taye and Ajwa both have touched upon this, but this is really part of a broader endeavor where we work with different stakeholders, partners, and target audiences, and we've had already the pleasure to hear from Taye, from Ajwa, so from AU partners and AU direct affiliated partners in the A Commission and the related departments. But also a part of this endeavor is to work through regional economic commissions and their centers of excellence, because there is a broad network of really well-established training centers on the African continent that run and deliver trainings in this area and beyond. But also what we're doing as project partners is to bringing together also the expertise from the international community and the ongoing discussions about standards and so on through the interagency working group on DPR, and including as well, of course, donor agencies and research centers. And last but not least, all of the speakers, I think, have been touching upon this, that also the purpose of all of this is to integrate also practice and the lived experience of practitioners into the training materials that are being developed and disseminated. So the way of how we do all of this and how such a training approach looks like is that we work together with partners. So in this case, with the regional training, with the centers of excellence within the regional commissions and mechanisms. The first step of all of this is to do a needs analysis together with the partner to see where's the gaps in capacities, what is it that we want to achieve and create together. And so is it that some of the training centers need specific technical support, others want to build the trainer base and so on. So that questions like this are part of a needs analysis process. And that has been already concluded for this project. And then where we're at right now is that we are developing both face-to-face as well as online learning materials. The online learning materials will actually be available to a broader audience beyond the project partners and will be managed by the AU partners. So this is a resource that beyond the direct, the agencies that are directly organizations part of this project will have access to. And then we will have the online training, but then the way that UNITAR and partners will work in this, that we will build really a base within the partnering centers of excellence of trainers that are being able independently from us and the project partner to develop and roll out training programs. So that's important to all of us, that we are creating a system that is not dependent on anyone external coming in the long run, but that the intervention is to create a pool of trainers that are equipped with the materials, with the tools, with instruments to roll out capacity building programs in support of the programming priorities that we mentioned before that connect the DDR with the early warning mechanisms. And then the trained trainers in the centers of excellences will go on and train, multiply to practitioners within the member states of their respective, within this respective region. So it's really a cascade model with the idea to reach a broad number of trainers and people, and then eventually practitioners that can implement and can contribute to this collective effort of building a broader base for all of the efforts that are being done in connecting to building this bridge between prevention and response. And now we're seeing this blue part on the screen, and this is where I will finish, and that links to also the introduction that Dan made, is that of course, these are not normal times, and traveling for the purpose of training or for any purpose really has become a luxury, and also learning has undergone significant changes how we shape this and in which spaces it can take place. And so we're prepared to support also a virtual format of all of what I just explained, and that is something that we've been doing all throughout the past year to work together with partners and also in virtual ways to roll out training programs, and that can take many different shapes and forms. All of us are now very familiar with Zoom, I believe, but we have many different other tools we have done. For instance, in areas of low connectivity, we've done WhatsApp trainings, have been doing text-based trainings, we've been doing radio programming. So there's many different ways how this can be done, many different tools, how virtual trainings can continue to support us in such capacity building systems, and both steps in the training of the partnering centers of excellence, but also in the multiplication work that the trainers will do. So I will stop here and leave time and space for Amy and the discussion, but very happy to answer any questions that might have come up during the presentation. Thank you.
Svenja, thanks so much, and that's great. We now have the I think that's a really useful picture. Again, just to move this from the sort of architecture into some of the process elements. So let's move. We'll move right along. And just to introduce Amy and ECARIS. ECARIS is a consulting group that's been contracted under this program by the World Bank, and essentially, one of the key questions, and I think this is, again, looking at the unified spectrum across, humanitarian development interventions, questions of indicators and metrics and what you measure and treasuring what you measure, all the sort of mantra, but how you do this, how you dynamically both assess, evaluate, and then inform on a program like this, and support the objectives of building collaborative approaches, collective approaches towards common outcomes around prevention at both national and regional levels. So, Amy, over to you, and we'll have some time after you wrap for answering the remaining questions that are coming in.
Great, thank you, Dan. Yeah, it's great to be joining everyone today here from the UK after what feels like another long lockdown. And as Dan mentioned, ECARIS is a research consulting firm based in the UK, and we advise government, civil society on various policy issues across a range of themes. And we joined this project following our evaluation of UK aid support to various African Union institutions, including the Department of Political Affairs. Okay, so as Dan highlighted, a key objective of this programme is to strengthen linkages and learning between the African Union, RECs and member states. And to achieve this, the programme needs to be able to understand new and emerging needs, effective approaches and activities, and how to adapt in response to these. ECARIS's role in the programme is to ensure an ongoing learning cycle, to be able to show what's working well and what needs to be more effective for the different stakeholders that are involved. This is a really critical
Amy,
part.
Sorry to interrupt, but you're coming in sort of in and out a little bit. I wonder if there's if it's about positioning your mic, but it's coming loud and clear, and then it disappears down a long tunnel.
Is that any better?
That's great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
No worries. So the importance of this approach really is critical in terms of promoting the South-South knowledge sharing approach that the project is promoting. And ultimately, we aim to be able to provide tailored learning products designed to continue stimulating and promoting collaboration in the long term. While the overall programme has clear outputs, which are defined in a more traditional M&E framework, the overall approach for achieving the results is evolving based on emerging needs and changing context. It's therefore really important to have a flexible M&E approach and a flexible approach to testing and gathering evidence and ensuring a continuous feedback loop to assess the relevance and the effectiveness of the programme. It's important to flag that COVID has presented both challenges and opportunities when it comes to the learning agenda. Evaluators really need to be mindful right now of adding to participants' existing burdens and risk doing harm. And governments and civil society are having to reprioritise around the pandemic. As well as that, conflict contexts are constantly shifting, and participants' own challenges and accessibility can be challenging as well. But we have found through our wider work with the African Union that COVID has presented some opportunities from an M&E perspective as well. And we found that the pandemic and the reduced travel has led to a critical mass of African Union stakeholders available to take part in monitoring and evaluation, as well as the ability to test unique platforms and capture more immediate insights in real time. So the overall monitoring and evaluation approach that we're using in this project is an action learning approach. And action research or action learning is an approach where learning is conducted in action to enable a programme to be carried out more effectively and based on evidence. And rather than being focused on classical quantifiable results, it's much more problem focused and context specific. And its particular value is in its future oriented approach. So being able to inform and shape future iterations of interventions and partnerships. And the approach of action learning aligns well with conflict analysis and prevention approaches more broadly. It places a strong emphasis on critical reflection with different stakeholders and helps to ensure that programmes are responding to articulated needs, as well as identifying activities that could do harm and seizing opportunities to add value in specific themes or contexts. Most action research tends to be framed around specific guiding questions, which often evolve during the lifetime of the process and as new areas of interest emerge that require further probing and further investigation. And for action research to be effective, feedback must be translated into modifications or directional changes to bring about lasting benefits to the project. So our learning agenda overall aims to glean and integrate evidence in a dynamic manner as opposed to a post-mortem assessment. This can help us to develop a more evidenced account of how achievements are taking place, as well as more nuanced recommendations that can be used to further incentivise joint early warning analysis and collective action, as well as to strengthen understanding and buy-in of the project and encourage future scale-up. We also aim to showcase emerging insights from the project, particularly how COVID and remote working has forced new means through which to collect and analyse data, and how the project has responded to this, and how wider conflict prevention initiatives might be able to benefit from this expertise. We also aim to strengthen the project's knowledge generation, curation and dissemination components, including sharing and targeting learning to policymakers, practitioners and researchers through conferences like these. And as noted, the findings will emerge as the research develops. So while these won't necessarily be concrete or absolute, they will be shared with the World Bank and partners as part of an ongoing process of reform and improvement. And as I mentioned, questions and action research approaches are constantly evolving. But at the moment, the key questions which are guiding our approach are the extent to which the programme has strengthened awareness and links between prevention and response actors and instruments, Any major challenges and opportunities identified in providing a hybrid model of technical assistance, so looking at both remote and in-person modalities. How effectively gender has been integrated into the intervention, as well as opportunities to do this more in the future. And finally, how the programme can be used as an incubator project or pilot project to inspire future iterations, including identification of additional end users of data. So that's all from me.
Thanks very much, Amy. Maybe I'll, while you're you still have your slides up, I'm just pulling the questions off the chat, and I'd like to just send one your way immediately, which has just come in from John, whether the action learning framework has been linked to the sense-making frameworks for enhanced stakeholder value or other potential benefits. So one of the, and I think maybe just to take that question, I'd like actually just to pose a general question to both you, Amy, and Svenja on the learning, both the sort of modelling side, but also the capacity building and training. This sort of correspondence with whether it's other frameworks, other initiatives, the sort of interrelation, the complementarity, and trying to build added value. Maybe you could just address that question, and I'll come back with a couple of other questions that have come in on the chat. Amy, do you want to start, and then Svenja, you're muted. Are you having problems unmuting? Yes. All right, Svenja, would you like to go ahead and then see if Amy can get it working?
I will try and see. Yes, it seems to work on my end. Yeah, so I will gladly speak about the question of working with what exists and building it further and so on. I think what this year has taught us, and in general terms, is that things can change and evolve rapidly. And so any of the learning systems that we set in place, the methodologies that we set in place, are taking actually that into account, because we will not know what the early warning world and what's also the conflict response world will look like in even 2 months from now. So in that sense, the way we work actually in partnership with institutions, with the centers of excellence, for instance, is actually to put tools into place that look at underlying attitudes, behaviors, but also skills and knowledge that this field requires, and this type of action and the type of response requires, and that combined, of course, with standards and with operational guidances has been set in place. So let's say in this specific case, there have been the operational guidance notes that the African Union Commission and partners have been developing, and that will be part of the training systems that we will be sitting in place. But what we want to be able, the centers of excellence to be able to do, is that as this world of practice is evolving, as new data is available, and as new also insights evolve, that the trainings can be adapted, that the learning systems can be adapted. And so in that sense, the way that UNITAR works with partners is exactly that, to see in parts of what is really the critical knowledge base, and that's set through the mandated organizations such as the African Union, such as other standard setting institutions such as UN institutions and so on. But then there's the evolving areas around really what is the ongoing practice, what is the practice base, how can we can this inform an ongoing change as well in how practitioners can use tools, and in this case also data, to inform their action. So that's where this is coming in, and I will give the floor to Amy, who managed to unmute her microphone. I think, Dan, you need to unpin me from the presentation so that Amy can come in.
Yeah, Amy, have you managed? Is it working? It's not working. All right. So, keep try. Oh.
Hello.
Yes, perfect.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Sorry about that, everyone. Some technical difficulties. I'm just looking back through the questions. Thank you, John. We're still at a very early stage, actually, of designing the action learning approach and adapting it to the COVID era. So we haven't actually had a chance yet to cross-reference with the sense-making framework, but it's a really interesting idea, and definitely key to our approach is trying to involve as many stakeholders as possible and in a meaningful way, and to make sure that the products that we develop are tailored and useful for a range of different people. So that is something that we'll certainly look into at various levels. Thank you.
Maybe I can. Sorry, was someone speaking? No, I think I was just getting an echo. Can I just put that same question actually out to Tai and Ajwa, just in terms of the sort of the connections, the linkages elsewhere with similar, whether it's similar programs or similar work, or where you see, you know, this particular focus for the project, where there are very obvious areas of harmonizing or relating to other programs that are ongoing. Tai, do you want to? I mean, I know there was a question that came in about how the early warning system and the human rights-based approach is how it resonates with a system, the EGAD system, and it's all that validation. In fact, several of the comments that are coming on the chat, again, talking about, you know, how I think the thematic focal lens on on particular contextualization, so that local agency, local grassroots, primary data focus also seems to be one that's pretty broadly supported. But if there's anything, and then I have one more general question I want to pose to the panel. Question, Tai. Sorry, we have one last poll I'm putting up while you. But Tai, please go ahead, and then just anyone on the panel, please continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Dan. I just want to showcase our very much attached relationship with the regional economic communities. Therefore, the regional economic communities are considered as building blocks of the African Union, but as they are collections of member states, they do have their own mandates to fulfill. And I'm happy to see in the participants some people who clearly understand and work through the EGAD system, which is the C1 system, the conflict early warning and response mechanism. For example, C1, when it began, it used to cover post-terrorist conflict. That is their niche, that is their area. And of course, Qs and C1 somehow adopt one another different methodologies, processes. For example, we are not pioneers of field reporting. C1 is the pioneer of field reporting. Even ECOWAS came before Qs. Qs came into the advent of field reporting only in 2010. Therefore, these regs, in order to fulfill their mandates, they have been doing a kind of similar things that I mentioned earlier. Therefore, luckily, as those early warning systems of the regs are part and parcel of the African Union Continental early warning system, we do have the platform where we are actually synchronizing our methodologies, synchronizing our tools and synchronizing our processes in such a way that we are answering our individual mandates at the regional economic communities and at the African Union level. Therefore, now, as it has been mentioned in the presentation, at this particular phase of our human rights mainstreaming, we are going to pilot with 3 regional economic communities. The likely candidates are going to be, for example, COMESA. COMESA has got a very important niche in structural conflict prevention. Therefore, how can we adapt human rights mainstreaming into the work of COMESA? And the other is a more matured early warning system in the form of ECOWARN, the ECOWAS early warning system. And there we can also see how we can mainstream human rights in order to assist ECOWARN answer the needs of its own decision-making hierarchy in ECOWAS. And the other candidate can be a regional mechanism in the form of East African Standby Force. And the East African Standby Force is a kind of a response mechanism. Therefore, if we do have boots on the ground in the form of peacekeeping operation, how can we mainstream human rights to a kind of regional mechanism which actually dealt with such kind of scenarios? Therefore, the good thing here is, yes, as AUQs, we do have our mandate, but the regional economic communities have got their own mandate. And luckily, there is a kind of overlap with the working with civil society organizations. For example, in West Africa, UNEP is working with us as well as with ECOWAS. And that's a very beautiful thing. And in Southern Africa, there are some civil society organizations that work with COMESA and SADC. And that is really beautiful. And by doing so, of course, we are going to make sure that this knowledge is going to be disseminated all along, but at the end of the day, each of these institutions are going to answer their own mandate. Back to you, Dan. Sorry.
Thank you, Ty. Ajwa, would you like anything you'd like to come in with here?
Thank you, Ty. I think Ty has put it beautifully how it works, but just to say, on there, you asked about how the complementarity with what we are doing now with other areas of work, and just this what we are doing with the AU is very innovative, and it's not. We are learning as UN and other partners, including the EU. We've had lessons learned, dialogue with them on what we are doing with the AU. So just to emphasize, this is very new and very exciting area of work. And we are beginning to see what that looks like, what is the products that will come out. And I think with the second phase, what we are really hoping to see is to do more and to really see what it means to mainstream human rights in early warning, and how does that impact on the ground and changes situations or gives us the tools for preventing and sustaining peace. And similarly with the CSOs as an office, CSOs are a critical partner for human rights. We work with CSOs. We also now looking at NHRIs as important component to this project, whether it's through the NONRI, that's the Network of African National Human Rights Institutions. We think they are also critical partners for this. And for this second phase, we're also really looking at the gender component and looking at how some of the gender indicators can be used or can be strengthened. So also looking at bringing a gendered approach in addition to the human rights approach, with gender approach being a core component of that. Thank you.
Najwa, thanks very much. Yeah, absolutely important.
Maybe, Dan, just to add one more thing.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Dan. The other stakeholder is also the African Commission on Human and People Rights. Therefore, we do have that organ which can benefit from all this work from the AU and the REX. That's what I want to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, so just let me. I know our time is limited. We have about 5 minutes left. But I wanted to put one more, actually, just to take the very last question, which I think is, thank you very much, Ellie, for writing this one, which is about building up the capacity building efforts actually on this linkage between early warning, early response, and primary data from affected communities. The question is, is, for a real challenge in improving the social sensing and social listening capacity of those communities involved. I think that's absolutely it's a really important point. That in a sense, this whole project is about building skills, building competencies, engaging in sort of reorganization, transformation of systems. But to remember that as part of the objectives, particularly on reaching people most affected and most vulnerable, that whole capacity to then have the observatory to receive the sort of information also needs attention. And I know that's there's a whole set of issues here around building. A lot of the conversation at the moment with COVID is the sort of building back better and building resilience and local sort of integrated community development approaches that have to have a rather different scale in terms of their kind of grander objectives. I think it's a useful point for us to also to bear in mind and reflect on. Can I put? Sorry, I didn't mean to speak for 2 minutes, and I realise we now only have 3 minutes remaining. I know there was a question about cost, and that some of that there was also some response on the chat. But if there are any particular reflections from any of you on the cost side of this, on cost financial implications, that would be great. But if I could maybe just ask for your last word, a sentence or two, anything you want to leave our audience with. If I could, why don't I start as I look at my screen here? Ajwa, do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Tai. I want to say thank you to all the fellow panelists and also to our participants for listening in. And just to conclude, to say for us, we are putting the people at the center. So the last question from Ellie, I also agree, is critical. That it's not just about getting data, it's also about passing on knowledge and building resilience. And we know much of the information we get is from women and from youth, and that they are the people first who not only have access to this information, but they are most affected by conflict. And by adopting a human rights-based approach, it means putting these very people at the center and reaching those at risk of being left behind. Thank you for inviting the UN Human Rights Office, to be part of this discussion.
Thanks, Ajwa. Svenja, over to you. You're not able to unmute? Tai, over to you. We'll see if we can work that out quickly before we're shut down.
Thank you for more specifically to the participants. I try to answer some of the questions in the chat, but it is a very good beginning, and please don't shy off. You can contact us for further discussions. And thank you for all the fantastic questions raised. And conflict prevention is a challenge. Therefore, we need collective minds. We need to really broad collective efforts in order to broad a kind of solution. And as much as we can, let's play our role at the grassroots level. Let us make peace happen. Let us silence the gun. That's my message to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Tai. All right, Svenja, I can see you're back on.
Yes, thank you. Well, after these words, I'm hesitant to say any more because this was perfect, Tai, and thank you everyone, the panelists and the participants. I think one of the reflections I still wanted to share in response also to the costs or to these reflections is that it doesn't have to be very extremely costly to set in place these systems, and this is also part of our role, and that I'm speaking from experience in other contexts such as Colombia and Libya, is that actually this reaching these critical communities, what you're speaking about, Tai and Adjoa, those like who hold part of the puzzle and part of the truth of what we want to know and want to see is critical. And it like through these multiplication systems that we work with, for instance, we've been able to reach in a relatively short time a lot of communities that are in highly conflict affected areas. So that is part of the ambition that we are bringing to this project consortium, and to really think together how and through which means can those who hold these parts of the puzzle be brought into this process and feed them back into these very important systems that Tai and Adjoa so eloquently have described at the African Union level, at the broader institutional level. So we will do that from our perspective and help try our best to put the systems in place and support with that. Thank you very much. And yeah, interesting discussion all around. Thank you.
Maybe any final words? Yep, you're on.
Yeah. Okay, I'd just say I think working with a lot of different donors and implementing partners on monitoring and evaluation approaches. I commend the World Bank and partners for trialling a really adaptive response to learning as part of this programme, which is really important. Less of a focus on rigid traditional results monitoring and more room for innovation and experimentation. So would encourage more people to take a similar approach, and also encourage the participants here today to keep an eye out for the learning products coming out of the programme, and to keep sharing their expertise and insights as well.
Thank you. All right, we're a little bit over time, but just to thank all of you who've participated, and you have the list of contacts now. Feel free to be in touch with panel members. Certainly, we will do our best to share information as this project continues, and elaborate the architecture for doing so. But at this venture, just to thank all our panelists, and to everyone out there, keep well, keep safe, and thanks for joining.